Okay, so what is a whole fraction? Well, the word whole means one. So remember a fraction, if we have a proper fraction is where the numerator, what's on top, that number is smaller than the bottom number, the denominator. And so as long as this number is smaller than the denominator, then your fraction is going to be less than 1. So less than 1. So a whole fraction is when the top number and the bottom number are the same. It doesn't matter if it's 15 over 15, 20,000 over 20,000. These are all equal to 1, okay? 1 whole. So a whole fraction, you can take any, well, let's take a look here. So if we have the number 5, how many whole fractions are in the number 5? That's right, there's 5. So we've got 1 over 1 plus 1 over 1 plus 1 over 1 plus 1 over 1 plus 1 over 1. Oops. 1. Okay? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the same thing as writing 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. Okay? So, question then, if we have 10/5, well, since the top number is bigger than the bottom number, we know that we have at least one whole fraction in here, okay? So we can pull that out by subtracting a whole fraction. I'm going to subtract a fraction, and since the 5 over 5 or 1 over 1 or 1,000 over 1,000 are all equal to 1, since I need to have the same denominator, I'm just going to choose 5 over 5, okay? So if I take 10 over 5 minus 5 over 5, now this brings it to 5 over 5 plus 5 over 5, okay? Because I took this fraction and I pulled out this 5 over 5 here, this whole fraction, and I was left with 10 minus 5 is 5. And what do you know? This is also a whole fraction. So if I was to ask you, if I was to write down 10/5 and ask you how many whole fractions are in 10/5, well, you just keep pulling them out until you got to a proper fraction or you got to nothing at all. So here we had 2 proper fractions. Now, let's try this, okay? What if I have 11 over 5? How many whole fractions are in this? Well, if I subtract out, pull out a whole fraction, I can have 5 over 5, which is a whole fraction. And subtracting the 5 from the 11, that would leave me with 6 over 5, okay? Now I can pull out a second whole fraction out of here because this number is bigger than the bottom. So that would leave me with 5 over 5 plus 5 over 5 plus, and the 6 minus the 5 leaves me 1 over 5. So again, how many? I've got 2 whole fractions that I pulled out. So that means that 11 over 5 has 2 whole fractions in it. 2 whole fractions, okay? And so I could write it like this, or since this is the same thing as 1 plus 1, 1 plus 1 plus 1/5, I can just make that 2 and 1/5, okay? Do you see how I did that? When I have an improper fraction, I pull out all of the whole numbers that I can, all the whole fractions out of it that I can, and I write how many whole fractions I've got, and then whatever the remainder is, that becomes my numerator. So if I have, let's see here, we'll cross everything out, clear it. If I have, let's see here, 10 thirds, okay? Well, how many whole fractions do I have? Well, I could go ahead and just keep subtracting out whole fractions, or I could use a calculator, and I could just say, what is 10 divided by 3? 10 divided by 3. If I do that, I'm going to get, do it on a calculator real fast, and you'll see that you get 3.3333. Well, really, all I care about is this whole number, because this whole number tells me how many whole fractions I have. See, if I subtract 3 whole fractions, well, 10 minus 3 is 7. 7 minus another 3 is 4. 4 minus another 3 is 1, and I'm left with 1/3. So I can, when I want to find out how many whole fractions are in an improper fraction, I just take a calculator and I take the numerator and I divide it by the denominator, and whatever whole number I get, that tells me how many whole fractions I have. And then I'll just write 3. I have 3 whole fractions. And once I'm done with that 3, well, what's my remainder? 10 divided by 3 is 3 with a remainder of 1. So that 1 becomes my numerator. And then the denominator was 3, so that stays the same. Okay? Let's do another one. Okay? Let's go with 23 sevenths. Okay? So we know this is improper fraction because the top number is bigger than the bottom number. So we're going to go ahead and pull out a calculator to see how many whole fractions are in there, okay? So pull out your calculator, and if you do that and you take 23 divided by 7, you're going to get 3.28571429. But all we really care about is the whole number. So we know that there are 3 whole fractions in here. So I'm going to write a 3 right here, okay? Now, what's my remainder? What is my remainder? Well, if I have 7, or if I have 3 whole fractions, that would be 7 over 7 plus 7 over 7 plus 7 over 7. 7 plus 7 plus 7. So it's basically 7 times 3. 7 times 3 is 21. So if 7 times 3 is 21, what's my remainder? Well, 23 minus 21 leaves me with the remainder of 2. So I put that as my numerator. My denominator is 7. And so, since that's the whole fraction, I put that there. 3 2/7.